You'll remember the week before October 7th, Netanyahu stood at the United Nations and he held up a map. And he had that horrible, dirty smirk on his face, and he held up the map and he said, this is the future vision of the Middle East. This is what peace in the Middle East looks like. And if you looked at the map, he had completely erased Palestine completely from the map. In the same breath, he said that normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia will be the greatest deal since the end of the Cold War. Then the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations told Kan television, the Israeli television, he was asked if the government, if normalization with Saudi Arabia is on the table, will the government sign on it or not? And the Israeli ambassador replied that when the government realizes that normalization with Saudi Arabia means, quote, the complete Arab abandonment of the Palestinians, when they realize the opportunities that this presents, they will sign off it immediately. In the same trip, after making this speech, Netanyahu met with the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for the first time since Erdogan came to power in 2003. They discussed a joint gas pipeline in the Mediterranean. They discussed the Middle East corridor. Turkey is upset that the Middle East corridor will start in India. It will cross the sea a little bit and then go to the UAE, through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, through Israel into Europe, which will objectively transform the whole economics of the area. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was saying, don't go through Saudi Arabia, go through Turkey. We are better for you as a friend. The Israelis took that picture and they started goading the Palestinians and saying, look, the Sultan of the Muslim world is now sitting and recognizing me. The UAE ambassador to Washington, Yusuf Al-Utaiba, gave a talk to Brookings or Carnegie, one of those think tanks that has the blue emblem. I forgot which one. And he was asked, what has normalization of ties with Israel realistically achieved for the Palestinians? And he said, and I promise you, this is his words, not mine. He said, normalization with Israel has achieved absolutely nothing for the Palestinians. And we, Morocco, Sudan, and Bahrain, and these nations that have normalized, have been unable to get any real concessions for the Palestinians from the Israelis. And they said, well, what are you going to do about it? He said, now it's up to the future nations that want to normalize whether they want to get concessions for the Palestinians. But let's not talk about that. Let me tell you now how exciting it is, the number of flights we now have between Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv, and the wonderful economic trade contracts we now signed between Tel Aviv and between Abu Dhabi. So you can imagine when Netanyahu returns to Tel Aviv after the United Nations, you can imagine how he feels. This is it. This is my time. It's unprecedented. No one is standing by the Palestinians anymore. Nobody cares about their rights at this particular moment in time. Everybody's coming to me because they want Washington, not me, Netanyahu, a'udhu billah, but everybody is coming to me because they want Washington and coming to me because they want economic assistance. So Netanyahu orders that the Israeli army begins to build up forces by the border with the Jenin refugee camp near the West Bank, in preparation for another attempt to annex the West Bank. For those of you who don't know, in 2019, when Trump came to try to facilitate normalization between the UAE and Israel, Trump asked Netanyahu not to raid the Jenin refugee camp to allow room for the UAE to normalize. That's why the UAE told us that they were normalizing to prevent the annexation of the West Bank. Once they normalized, Netanyahu went back and raided the Jenin refugee camp. Then, unfortunately or fortunately, he lost the election. Naftali Bennett became prime minister, and he thought he went in to raid the Jenin refugee camp, and he was beginning a military campaign, but then Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by an Israeli sniper, and that ended the military operation, because the killing of such a high-profile journalist meant that the Israelis could no longer continue their offensive. This time Netanyahu believed that given everything suggests that the Palestinian cause is dying, that the Palestinians are being abandoned, that the Saudi ambassador to Palestine, ambassador between quotation marks, went to the Palestinian Authority to make an offer for money in exchange for recognition of Saudi normalization with Israel, something that the Palestinians were so angry about that when the Saudi ambassador wanted to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Palestinians told him, don't you dare come near Al-Aqsa Mosque, don't you dare set foot, you're not allowed to pray here, we refuse to allow you. And the Saudi ambassador said, whoa, okay, I'm just going to go back to Saudi Arabia, and inshallah another time I'll come to Al-Aqsa. Well done, Palestinians. Bismillah, mashallah, la quwwata illa billah. Reuters was reporting at the time that the Saudis had told the Americans, this isn't me, this is Reuters, the Saudis had told the Americans that they were no longer keen on a Palestinian state. They wouldn't mind as long as Biden gives them a NATO-style security agreement, nuclear technology for a chemical weapon, for a nuclear weapon, and also gives support for Vision 2030 to help to raise the profile of the concerts of Nicki Minaj, of Shakira, of these other concerts, to show the world that Saudi Arabia is changing, that it's developing a new image, and that it is becoming more modern, and that there is progress. If Biden provides these three, then he's willing to compromise on a Palestinian state. If you notice the Saudi Crown Prince's Fox News interview, you'll notice he doesn't mention a Palestinian state. He says that we will normalize in exchange for, quote, anything that makes life easier for the Palestinians. So Netanyahu, imagine how he feels sitting with his cabinet. Guys, there is no King Faisal anymore to do an oil embargo. There is no Anwar Sadat to surprise us and go into Sinai Peninsula or come across our border. There are no Arab leaders anymore who are giving us the 3 no's that they gave in Sudan. No peace, no normalization. I can't remember the 3rd no, but it was something about establishing justice. But the point here is Netanyahu said that the whole mood has shifted. Now is the time to go into the West Bank. So he sent troops to reinforce Gaza to make sure there'd be no counterattack, and he sent troops on the Jenin refugee camp. The point here being is everybody likes to start on October 7th, and the response is always, let's go back to 1948. But you don't need to go to 1948. The week before, Netanyahu was getting ready to invade. Netanyahu was getting ready to go into the West Bank. Netanyahu was openly saying, I'm going in. The Israeli settlers were going, they were setting fire to the houses of the Palestinians. They were going in and saying, we're going to take the Jenin refugee camp. Mahmoud Abbas, why were there huge protests against Mahmoud Abbas 2 weeks before October 7th? For those who don't know Mahmoud Abbas, he's the president of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. The reason there were huge protests was because they were saying to Mahmoud Abbas, the Israelis are preparing for an invasion. Why are you quiet and not doing anything? So when anybody talks to you about October 7th, it doesn't matter what we think about October 7th. The week before, the Israelis were getting ready to invade. They were raiding the Jenin refugee camp. And that's why for Netanyahu, the events of October 7th were a shock, because the Palestinians weren't supposed to have agency. They were supposed to be dying. The Palestinian cause was supposed to be finished. But suddenly now everybody is talking about Palestine. Everybody's talking about Gaza. 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, people were saying it looks really bad for the Palestinians. Now everybody's roaring Palestine's name. Netanyahu realized that this is a crisis now. Because Erdogan, who started the conflict, giving out neutral statements, the Turks are so angry that they're forcing him to take harder statements. The Saudi Crown Prince, who was on the verge of normalizing, is now lifting restrictions on the Haram Whereas the last year they haven't been making any dua for Palestine, now he's allowing the imams to make dua for Palestine again. The UAE, which normalized ties and refused to allow its commentators to criticize Israel, allowed Abdul Khaliq, Abdullah and Nasser al-Sheikh and these others to start lambasting the Israelis within limits. They can't say kick out the Israeli ambassador, but they can lambast the Israelis. But still, suddenly these nations are buckling under pressure. But more importantly for Netanyahu, the Israeli polls themselves were saying that this is all Netanyahu's fault. That Netanyahu brought this disaster on us. That Mr. Security turned out to be Mr. Insecurity. If you notice in that first week, usually when a country is in a state of war, a war cabinet is established almost immediately. It's a national duty, a national crisis. You form a war cabinet. But for almost 10 days, Netanyahu could not form a war cabinet. The reason being is that none of the parties thought that this was a serious threat to Israel. They believed it was a serious threat only to Netanyahu's political future. And they didn't want to be the ones to rescue Netanyahu's political future. Yair Lapid, head of the opposition, refused to join the cabinet. So did the other parties. Until eventually Netanyahu had to settle for Benny Gantz to join his war cabinet. 10 days they don't form a war cabinet, to show you how the Israelis viewed this as Netanyahu's fault, not the Palestinians' fault. The reason I say all this is to set the lay of the land 1 week before, and to put October 7th into context. And also to put into context that the Israelis themselves believe that this is Netanyahu's fault, not anything to do with the Palestinians. The problem, however, is here in the United States of America, you have some very ideological officials, such as Antony Blinken, who became so excited at the opportunity that all of this crisis now suddenly presents. The opportunity to get more land for Israel, to expand Israel's borders. Antony Blinken immediately told his State Department, not a single one of you is allowed to use the word pause or ceasefire. This is an exciting opportunity for ethnic cleansing, and we're going to take it to the maximum. John Paul, one of the directors of the State Department, is so horrified he resigns. State Department employees cannot believe that Blinken is so brazen in supporting ethnic cleansing. So they start shouting louder. Blinken then goes to Tel Aviv in excitement. And he says, I'm here not as the Secretary of State of the United States, I'm here as a Jew. As if the Holocaust happened in the Middle East. As if the Spanish Inquisition happened in Saudi. As if the Warsaw pogrom in Poland happened in Tunisia. As if somehow it was not the Europeans, the most anti-Semitic people in history, who persecuted the Jews and drove them out of Europe so that they came to the Muslim lands over and over again, and they found haven and they found sanctity. When Isabella of Spain kicked out the Jews and massacred them, it was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire who said, Allah has ordained on me a duty to look after you and protect you. Come to the Muslim lands. We will never treat you like these anti-Semitic Europeans. When the pogroms happened in Poland, it was the Muslim lands where the Jews found sanctity. After the Holocaust, the Jews, they got in their boats coming towards Palestine, and they had these big banners, please don't do to us what Europe has done to us. And we told them, never, we will never do it. The Muslims never do this kind of thing to other populations, because Allah doesn't allow us to. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ never allows us to. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he entered Medina and he made the Medina covenant, he said to the Jews, those who oppress you, we will defend you against them. and you will defend us against those who seek to oppress us. That's the bond between the relationship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined on us. That's why Umar al-Mukhtar, the Libyan liberation leader, when the Italians were capturing the Libyans and torturing them, when the Libyans finally captured Italians, they said, let's do to them what they do to us. Umar al-Mukhtar said, they are not our teachers. These anti-Semitic Europeans are not our teachers. One of the reasons that Jews searched for an independent state was because the Europeans treated them so horribly. They used to massacre them and persecute them. Even the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was not a favor to the Jews. It was an anti-Semitic proposal by Balfour in which he said, we don't want these alien Jews. We don't want them here. We want to kick them out. Go anywhere. Go Argentina, Uganda, go anywhere. We don't want you here. And that's why it was the only Jewish representative, in parliament actually stood up and rejected the Balfour Declaration. He said, what is this anti-Semitism? You want to kick us out of the country? We always assume it was a favor. It wasn't. It was because Europe was so anti-Semitic that they were passing laws in parliament and making declaration to get the Jews out of Europe. It's a uniquely European affair. So when Blinken turns up in Tel Aviv and says, I'm here as a Jew, I can't lie to you. When I heard that, I said, Alhamdulillah, you Jews have always been safe here. Marhaba khuya, welcome. Yeah, I know it must be tough for you guys, in Europe and in the barbaric nature of Europe. Come to the Muslim lands. We always look after you. Andalusia is the epitome of coexistence. Even to this day, Sarajevo, it's called the Jerusalem of Europe. Sarajevo, Muslim city in the heart of Europe. It's called the Jerusalem of Europe. Why? Because it's the only European city where the religions lived side by side peacefully. Under which rule? Under Muslim rule. Even they acknowledge it. But anyway, Blinken turns up to Tel Aviv and he says, I'm here as a Jew, not as the Secretary of State. And Blinken says, we will give every support for the Israelis to ethnically cleanse and to bombard Gaza. The problem, however, is there is an issue. When Blinken lands in Tel Aviv and meets with Netanyahu, he's supposed to go straight to Washington. But then he tells the journalists that we're not going home to Washington, guys. We need to go see bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. We need to go see the UAE. We need to go see Qatar. There's something urgent that I've discussed with Netanyahu that needs to be remedied very quickly. And we political analysts went, what happened? What did they say that requires them to go to the regional powers? Washington Post the next day reported, Blinken fails in his trip to the regional powers. And it said Blinken had gone to ask them to tamp down on public anger. Blinken and Netanyahu sat there and said that Muslims in the Bay Area are talking about Palestine so much that they're forcing a shift in public opinion. I'm going to seek help from bin Salman and bin Zayed and from our allies to get the Bay Area Muslims to be quiet. The Secretary of State and Netanyahu talked about you in their war room. Think about it. They talked about the priorities, the highest levels of state. They sat in their war room and they said that these guys in there are so problematic. I need to go on a plane. I need to fly thousands of miles in order to try to get help, to get them to be quiet. So some of the leaders say, Abshir, don't worry. I've got this. Abdurrahman al-Sudais, Assalamu alaikum. I need a fatwa that says that Gaza is fitna and that they should not talk about it because it might turn them against Wali al-Amr. Abshir ya Tawil Umar. Hadir. Sudais in the Haram in Mecca, he tells them, may Allah bless Gaza and give them victory, but don't talk too much about Gaza, things that you have no right to talk about, because this is a fitna that will lead you against your rulers. I had a Turkish friend who said to me, Sami, sometimes in your videos you exaggerate about the extent to which the ulama are used to keep people quiet about Gaza. I said, okay, حاضر, no problem. He said to me, I'm going to Umrah in Medina, and I'm going to prove to you that they're talking about Gaza and Palestine. Talk to Allah, Habibi, may Allah, when you're there, make dua that I have a chance one day in my lifetime to make Umrah again as well, inshallah. Say Ameen. Because it's not nice. People say they want to be political analysts. I tell them, you don't want to bear the consequences of it. So he goes and he sends me a voice note, 10 minutes long. And he says, Sami, the Imam in Medina said Gaza, and I recorded it for you. Here you go. Say something, Kazi. So I listened to the voice note. He doesn't understand Arabic, miskin. The Imam in the voice note says, our hearts are bleeding for Gaza, but ya ibadallah, beware the people who are trying to cause fitna and turn you against your leaders. Do not talk about issues that you do not know. Trust our leaders that they know what they are doing. Give your backing to our leaders. Don't burden them with your analyses. Stick to your leaders and obey them. This is the sunnah. This is what Islam is about. Astaghfirullah al-Azim. Astaghfirullah. Astaghfirullah. Medina al-Munawwar, next to the grave of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only that, bin Salman offers Blinken something else as well, where Blinken goes back and the Saudis decide to do something that no other Arab countries does. And bear in mind, the opinions expressed here are the opinions of the speaker only, not of the Muslim Center of the Bay Area. Please let them continue to do Umrah, inshallah. It's not their fault, wallahi, it's only mine. And please don't hold them to account for it. The organizers did not know what I was going to say. So on the night that Israel turns off the internet on Gaza and begins its ground invasion, Shakira is dancing in Riyadh in a Riyadh season. The UAE, Oman, Kuwait, and these other countries all banned their festivals. They all stopped it in solidarity with Gaza. But Turkey al-Sheikh, the descendant of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, I know the irony, the descendant of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, who is not Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, Turkey al-Sheikh is the head of the entertainment authority and the descendant of Muhammad Abdul Wahhab. Turkey al-Sheikh posts on Facebook on the Friday night before Riyadh season. And he says, how can anybody ask me to cancel Shakira and Riyadh season? Name me one football match that was cancelled because of a political event. And he doesn't have the class to even write at the bottom, may Allah accept the martyrs of Gaza. So Saudi Arabia says, okay, no problem, Blinken, don't worry. Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, is invited to Saudi Arabia as the keynote speaker at the Davos Forum. So in the middle of Riyadh, in the third week of bombing of Gaza, Jared Kushner from the heart of Saudi Arabia says that the Palestinians wanted to ruin the Abraham Accords, but the Saudis and the Israelis will not allow that to happen. And that the Saudis are aware that these Palestinians are also a threat to them. And he starts celebrating the Abraham Accords from the heart of Saudi Arabia. Then Jared Kushner comes back to the US and he says, the Saudis are still very enthusiastic about normalization of ties, and I felt safer in Saudi Arabia than I do on some of the university campuses.